Some footballers dance through the game. Steve McMahon fought his way through it. He wasn't elegant. He wasn't charming. But when your team was under siege, when the midfield needed blood, not ballet. Steve McMahon was the man you wanted. He tackled like every pass was an insult. He shouted like silence was weakness. And he played as if every game was war. At Liverpool, he became the engine behind a golden era. At England, he became the question no one wanted to answer. And when it was over, there were no tributes, no statues, just silence. Because Steve McMahon never fit the mold. He was too fiery to idolize, too honest to politic, too intense to be repackaged. But behind the boots, the shouts, the clenched fists, was a player who lived for one thing only: the fight for his team. This isn't just a story about tackles and trophies. It's about what it costs to play football without compromise. It's about being the backbone and getting buried behind the headlines. If you believe football should remember the warriors, not just the pretty passes and golden boys, subscribe. Because this is the story of Steve McMahon, the fighter football feared and never fully understood. August 20th, 1961. Liverpool. A city split by football, hardened by history. The docks were fading, jobs were scarce, and the streets taught you lessons no coach ever could. This was where Steve McMahon was born. Not to a spotlight, but to survival. He came up through the youth ranks at Everton, a blue shirt on his back and fire in his lungs. He wasn't graceful. He wasn't delicate. But even as a teenager, he played like a man with something to prove. Every minute, every match. He made his senior debut in 1980, barely 19 years old. By 1981, he was one of the youngest captains in Everton's history. Not because he asked for it, but because no one could ignore him. He barked at teammates twice his age. He threw himself into tackles with the same intent as a punch. And he wore the armband like a shield, not for honor, but for responsibility. He didn't chase attention. But people started watching. In 1983, Aston Villa came calling. £175,000. Not a fortune, but a mark of belief. He moved south, and in just over a year, he proved his worth. At Villa Park, he was more than a fighter. He was the heartbeat. The passes were cleaner, the vision sharper. But the fire? It never dimmed. And soon, the biggest club in England would take notice. In 1985, Liverpool were in transition. The old guard was fading. Graeme Souness had left. And Kenny Dalglish, newly appointed as player manager, needed a new heartbeat in midfield. He chose Steve McMahon. It was his first signing, a declaration. And McMahon didn't disappoint. He wasn't there to replace Souness. He was there to reinvent what midfield control looked like, with fire instead of finesse. From the moment he stepped onto the Anfield pitch, he brought an edge the team had been missing. He tackled like every ball belonged to him, shouted like silence meant surrender, and never, not once, backed down, even if it was against his own teammates in training. He wasn't just hard, he was intelligent, positionally sharp, disciplined when it mattered, and willing to do the ugly work so others could shine. Between 1985 and 1991, he helped Liverpool win 3 First Division titles, 1985-86, 1987-88, 1989-90, 2 FA Cups, 1986-1989, 1 Charity Shield. He played 277 games for the Reds, scored over 50 goals. But his impact couldn't be measured by numbers. He was the enforcer, the voice, the fuse. He wasn't just in the team, he was the attitude of the team. And then came the rivalry with Vinnie Jones. It was theater. It was war. 2 enforcers, toe-to-toe. But McMahon wasn't a clown. He was a commander. He didn't seek revenge. He sought control. While Vinnie performed for the cameras, Steve controlled the chaos. He didn't need headlines. He had Anfield behind him, and the respect of every man in that dressing room. He wasn't loved by the media. But inside Liverpool, he was trusted like few others. And that trust, would never fully translate to the national stage. Steve McMahon earned his first England cap in 1986. By then, he was dominating midfields for Liverpool, lifting trophies, and commanding respect from the fiercest players in the league. But for England, he was never first choice, never part of the Golden Circle. He collected just 17 caps in total and scored a single goal. He was picked for Euro '88, but it didn't go well. England crashed out, and in the final match, against the Soviet Union, one moment came to define his international career. A back pass, misjudged, gifted the Soviets a goal. England lost. He wasn't the only reason, not even close. But in the eyes of critics, it stuck. It was the kind of moment the media doesn't forget. And for McMahon, it was the end of his chance to become a regular. He was left out of the squad for Italia '90. No World Cup, no redemption, just silence. Others were chosen. Quieter players, safer ones, midfielders who followed the plan without speaking up. But McMahon, he wasn't built for quiet. He wasn't born to blend in. To some, he was difficult. To others, too aggressive. To England, he was never quite right. Too fiery, too raw, too unpredictable. But to his teammates, the ones who battled beside him, he was everything a country should have wanted. In 1991, Steve McMahon left Liverpool. He moved to Manchester City, looking for a fresh challenge, but something had shifted. The fire was still burning, but the stage was fading. By 1994, he was done playing. But he wasn't done with football. That same year, he stepped into management, taking over at Swindon Town. It was a bold move. Swindon had just been relegated from the Premier League, shattered and directionless. And McMahon, he brought exactly what he knew: discipline, intensity, structure. At first, it worked. He steadied the club, rebuilt belief, and demanded total effort. But it didn't last. Behind the scenes, there were clashes, with the board, with players, even with fans. McMahon managed like he played. No compromise, no shortcuts. And in the modern game, that didn't always land. He stayed 4 seasons. That alone said something. But when the results faded, so did the support. In 1998, he left Swindon, bruised but not broken. Next came Blackpool. Same story. Short success, flashes of fight, but never enough patience from above. And then, of all places, Thailand. McMahon took charge of Bangkok Glass FC in 2007. It was a new culture, a fresh start. And yet, the game didn't feel the same anymore. His style, once a weapon, was now called old school. Too intense, too direct, too much. Eventually, he walked away. No fanfare, no farewell. Just a quiet exit, like so many others who fought too hard for too long. For a player who once led Liverpool through wars, the silence that followed Steve McMahon's retirement was deafening. There was no testimonial match, no statue, no official recognition from the FA. Not even a whisper from the England setup he bled for. He tried his hand in media, appearing as a pundit for a few years on Sky Sports and other outlets, but he was never fully welcomed into the club of polished voices and easy smiles. He was too blunt, too intense, too honest, and soon the cameras turned elsewhere. Other Liverpool legends stayed in the spotlight. Commentary gigs, tributes, ambassador roles. McMahon faded. Not because he lacked value, but because football, now wrapped in marketing and image, no longer had a place for a warrior who didn't fit the script. He wasn't invited to the stage, he didn't chase it either. He lived quietly, in the background of the game he once fought for. No autobiography, no coaching comeback. Just a man with memories and the silence that came with them. And yet, among the old fans, the ones who remember the blood and thunder of English football, his name still means something. Because you don't forget a player like Steve McMahon, even if the system does. Steve McMahon didn't play for applause. He didn't chase headlines. He didn't sculpt a legacy. He earned it, one tackle at a time. He didn't wear the armband to smile for cameras. He wore it to take the hits others wouldn't, to lead from the front, to fight when no one else would. He wasn't a star in the modern sense. No PR, no brand, no autobiography tour. But for those who watched him, for those who stood at Anfield when the midfield was a battlefield, he was unforgettable. He didn't float. He didn't finesse. He drove teams forward with grit, voice, and fire. He wasn't England's poster boy, but he was everything English football once stood for: honor, commitment, defiance. And maybe that's why he was left behind. Because Steve McMahon didn't change for the game. He made the game meet him on his terms. Even in silence, his presence still echoes through every player who dares to lead with their chest out, who shouts through the storm, who refuses to fold. He didn't ask for a statue. He didn't write his own story. So we wrote it for him. If stories like this matter to you, the ones football forgot, the ones that carried the weight so others could dance, subscribe. Because we don't just tell football stories, we remember football souls. Steve McMahon, the fighter football feared and never fully understood.